Ohio billionaire CEO took his mistress to a gala to shame his ex-wife, but he regrets it. Those beautiful little girls calling you mommy, they're mine, aren't they? Marcus Hartwell's voice cracked as he stared at his ex-wife across the hospital waiting room, the truth hitting him like a freight train. Natalie Rivers looked up from where she'd been pacing, her designer gown wrinkled, her perfect makeup streaked with tears. You lost the right to ask that question the day you served me divorce papers while accusing me of trying to trap you. But they're 4 years old, Natalie. The timeline you were too busy destroying our marriage to notice, she whispered fiercely, glancing toward the pediatric ward where one of the twins was being examined. I was 8 weeks pregnant when you decided your business rivalry with Thompson Tech was more important than your wife. Marcus sank into a plastic chair, his $15,000 tuxedo suddenly feeling like a costume. All this time they've been out there, and I never knew I had daughters. You never wanted to know, Natalie shot back. You were so convinced I was some gold digger trying to sabotage your precious company that you couldn't see I was carrying your children. The hospital's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Marcus stared at his hands that had signed billion-dollar contracts but had never held his own daughters. Tonight was supposed to be his moment of triumph, his chance to publicly humiliate the woman who'd taken half his fortune. Instead, he was learning that he'd destroyed the most valuable thing he'd ever possessed. Before we dive deeper into this devastating story of revenge gone wrong, tell us where you're listening from and what time it is. Are you questioning your own priorities right now? Wondering about the bridges you might have burned? Drop it in the comments. We love connecting with our Lux Love Chronicles family, who understand that sometimes the greatest victories look like the most crushing defeats. Now, let me take you back to where this life-altering night began, because what you just heard was the moment Marcus Hartwell's entire world crumbled. But to understand the magnitude of his fall, you need to see how high he thought he was flying. It was 6:47 p.m. on a crisp October evening in Columbus, Ohio, when Marcus Hartwell adjusted his platinum cufflinks and checked his reflection in the backseat mirror of his Bentley Mulsanne. At 42, he commanded respect in every boardroom he entered. His steel gray eyes had intimidated Fortune 500 CEOs and venture capitalists across 3 continents. As founder and CEO of Hartwell Industries, he built a tech empire from a cramped garage startup to a multinational corporation worth $2.3 billion. The company specialized in enterprise software solutions that revolutionized how major corporations manage their data infrastructure and cybersecurity protocols. His algorithms protected banks, hospitals, and government agencies from cyber threats. His innovations had made him wealthy beyond imagination and earned him recognition as one of Forbes' 40 Under 40 business leaders. Tonight, he felt like a gladiator entering the Colosseum, ready to deliver the killing blow to an enemy who'd humiliated him in front of Ohio's elite society. "You look nervous," came a sultry voice from beside him. Vivian Cross shifted in the leather seat, her red silk dress riding up slightly as she crossed her long legs. At 24, she was everything Marcus thought he wanted: beautiful, ambitious, and completely devoted to his success. Her platinum blonde hair was styled in Hollywood waves that framed her model-perfect features, and her body was toned from daily Pilates sessions and a personal trainer who cost more than most people's monthly rent. As Hartwell Industries head of marketing, she understood his world in ways his ex-wife never had. She spoke the language of quarterly projections and market expansion. She appreciated the sacrifices required for building empire. She never complained about 18-hour workdays or emergency flights to close deals in Singapore or Stockholm. "Not nervous," Marcus replied, his voice carrying the confidence that had intimidated business rivals for decades. "Excited." Tonight, Natalie learns what happens when you try to destroy a man's life. Vivian's perfectly manicured hand found his thigh, her red nails tracing patterns against the expensive fabric of his custom Tom Ford tuxedo. And she'll see exactly what she lost when she walked away from all this. All this encompassed more than just wealth. Marcus's influence extended far beyond his bank accounts. He sat on the boards of 3 major charities, had the governor's private phone number, and could make or break political careers with a well-timed campaign contribution. His recommendation could secure someone a spot at Harvard Business School or a position at Goldman Sachs. When Marcus Hartwell wanted something to happen in Ohio, it happened. She probably can't even afford a decent dress for tonight, Vivian continued, her voice carrying the casual cruelty of someone who'd never known real struggle. I heard through the society grapevine that she's been living in some modest little house in Aurora, trying to make ends meet with some pathetic nonprofit work. Marcus's smile was predatory. Perfect. The contrast will be obvious to everyone. The Bentley pulled up to the Columbus Convention Center, where Ohio's elite had gathered for the annual Elite Charity Gala. The building's neoclassical facade was bathed in golden light, with red carpet stretching from the curb to the entrance. Photographers from Columbus Monthly and Ohio Society magazines were stationed at strategic points, ready to capture the evening's most significant moments. At $10,000 per plate, it was the social event of the season, a glittering display of wealth and influence disguised as philanthropy. The guest list read like a who's who of Midwest power. Tech entrepreneurs who'd sold companies to Google and Microsoft, real estate dynasties that owned half of downtown Columbus, political families whose ancestors had shaped Ohio since statehood, and old money that traced their fortunes back to railroad and steel empires. The cause this year was children's education, which Marcus found ironically appropriate given what he planned to accomplish tonight. He'd specifically chosen this event because he knew Natalie would feel obligated to attend. She'd always been passionate about education and children's welfare, one of the many naive, idealistic streaks that had frustrated him during their marriage. "Remember," he said to Vivian as their chauffeur opened the door, "we're here to make a statement. I want every person in that room to see that Marcus Hartwell doesn't just survive betrayal, he thrives. I want them to see what success actually looks like." Vivian's smile was sharp as a blade, her white teeth perfect against her scarlet lipstick. "Don't worry, darling. By the end of tonight, everyone will know exactly where they stand in the hierarchy." The ballroom was a masterpiece of opulence that spoke to old money sensibilities and new money ambitions. Crystal chandeliers imported from Austria cast rainbow patterns across Italian marble floors, while floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the Columbus skyline. The city lights twinkled like earthbound stars, creating a backdrop that photographers would fight over all evening. Round tables draped in ivory silk seated 10 guests each, with centerpieces of white orchids flown in from Thailand that morning. Each place setting featured Waterford crystal, Hermes china, and sterling silver cutlery that caught the light with every movement. The overall effect was designed to remind attendees that they were among Ohio's most privileged citizens, gathered for the noble purpose of helping those less fortunate. Marcus made his entrance with the calculated precision of a man who understood that power was as much about perception as reality. His Tom Ford tuxedo was custom-tailored to emphasize his athletic build, maintained through daily 5 a.m. workouts with a former Navy SEAL personal trainer. His dark hair, touched with distinguished silver at the temples, was perfectly styled by a barber who flew in from New York specifically for important events. The Patek Philippe Nautilus on his wrist cost $180,000, more than most people's houses, but it wasn't just about the price tag. It was about the statement. The watch represented exclusivity, taste, and the kind of success that couldn't be faked or bought quickly. Only people who truly understood luxury would recognize its significance. But it was Vivian who drew the stares. Her crimson dress was a work of art designed by Valentino's head couturier, created specifically for her figure and this event. The color was chosen strategically, bold enough to command attention, but sophisticated enough to avoid seeming desperate. Every line and curve was calculated to make other women envious and other men regretful about their own companions. Every eye in the room tracked their movement as they navigated toward their table near the front, a power position Marcus had specifically requested through his assistant's careful coordination with the event planners. He nodded to acquaintances with the casual confidence of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room. "Marcus Hartwell," came a smooth voice behind them. "I was wondering if you'd show tonight, given the circumstances." Marcus turned to find Robert Thompson, CEO of Thompson Tech and his biggest business rival. The man's smile was political, all surface charm with calculation underneath. Thompson was older, perhaps 55, with the kind of weathered handsomeness that came from decades in boardrooms and on golf courses. His tuxedo was immaculate, but Marcus noted with satisfaction that it was off the rack, not custom-tailored. "Robert, still trying to poach my clients with inferior technology, I see. Just offering superior service at competitive prices," Thompson replied, his eyes lingering on Vivian with obvious appreciation. "Though I see you've been making some interesting personnel decisions lately. Mixing business with pleasure can be complicated." The comment had multiple layers. Thompson knew about Marcus's relationship with Vivian, knew it violated the company's fraternization policies, knew it gave ammunition to competitors who wanted to paint Marcus as unprofessional. But Marcus also heard jealousy beneath the criticism. Vivian stepped closer to Marcus, her body language clearly marking territory. Her smile was devastating as she extended her hand. "Mr. Thompson, how lovely to see you again. I trust your quarterly projections are meeting expectations?" The question was innocent on the surface, but loaded with insider knowledge that shouldn't have been accessible to a marketing director. Marcus felt a surge of satisfaction at the surprise that flashed across Thompson's face. Let him wonder how Hartwell Industries was staying ahead of Thompson Tech's strategic moves. "If you'll excuse us," Marcus said smoothly, placing his hand on the small of Vivian's back in a gesture that was both possessive and dismissive. "We have more important people to see." As they moved through the crowd, Marcus basked in the whispered conversations that followed their wake. He caught fragments of discussion, mentions of his latest acquisition, speculation about expansion into European markets, admiration for his companion's beauty. This was exactly the reaction he'd planned for. He'd orchestrated this moment for 18 months, ever since Natalie had walked away with half his assets and left him feeling like a fool in front of Ohio's business community. The divorce had been messy, public, and humiliating. She'd accused him of caring more about business than their marriage, of treating her like an employee rather than a wife, of being emotionally unavailable and psychologically abusive. The accusations had stung because they contained enough truth to be believable. Marcus had worked 18-hour days, had missed anniversaries for board meetings, had expected Natalie to understand that building an empire required sacrifices from both partners. He genuinely believed she would appreciate the lifestyle his success provided, the mansion in Upper Arlington, the vacation home in Kiowa Island, the private jet for spontaneous trips to Paris or Napa Valley. Instead, she'd claimed to be lonely in their marble palace, surrounded by luxury, but starved for attention and affection. She'd wanted children. He'd wanted to wait until the company reached certain revenue milestones. She'd wanted quiet dinners at home. He'd wanted to attend networking events and client entertainment functions. She'd wanted a husband. He'd wanted a supportive partner who understood that business came first. Tonight, she would see him with a beautiful younger woman who appreciated his ambition, understood his priorities, and never complained about the demands of building and maintaining an empire. She would realize what she'd given up when she'd chosen to destroy their marriage over petty emotional needs. "There's Senator Williams," Vivian murmured, pointing toward a distinguished man near the bar surrounded by a small cluster of admirers. "He's been very interested in our cybersecurity division's government contracts." Later, Marcus replied, scanning the room with predatory focus. "First, I want to find my dear ex-wife and introduce her to my new reality." But as minutes passed, Natalie was nowhere to be seen. Marcus had expected her to slink in quietly, probably wearing something modest and forgettable from a department store, maybe accompanied by whatever friend had agreed to be her +1 for such an intimidating social event. Maybe she didn't come, Vivian suggested, though something in her tone suggested she didn't quite believe it. Maybe she realized she'd be out of her league here. Marcus frowned. That didn't sound like the Natalie he'd known. Stubborn to a fault, she'd never backed down from a challenge, never admitted defeat gracefully. If she knew he would be here, and his assistant had made sure word got back to her through mutual acquaintances, she would come. Pride alone would demand it. At 7:30, just as Marcus was beginning to think Vivian might be right, the ballroom's main entrance opened with the kind of subtle fanfare reserved for very important arrivals. Conversations began dying in concentric circles outward from the doorway as heads turned toward whatever had commanded such immediate attention. Marcus followed the collective gaze, and felt his confidence evaporate like morning mist. Natalie Rivers, she'd reclaimed her maiden name, stood in the entrance like something from a Hollywood premiere. Gone was the simple, practical woman he'd divorced. In her place stood a vision in midnight blue silk that seemed to absorb and reflect light simultaneously. Her dress was clearly couture, flowing around her like liquid starlight, cut to emphasize the elegant line of her shoulders and the graceful curve of her waist. Her auburn hair, which she'd always worn long and straight during their marriage, was now styled in a sophisticated updo that showcased the graceful line of her neck and the delicate architecture of her collarbones. Diamond earrings caught the light with every movement, not the ostentatious chandelier style favored by new money, but classic solitaires that spoke of understated elegance and old-world sophistication. But it wasn't just her transformation that stopped Marcus's breath and sent his pulse skittering like a teenager's. Beside her stood two little girls, perhaps 4 years old, identical in every way except for the tiny differences that marked them as unique individuals. One wore a pink dress with small pearl buttons and a satin sash, while the other's was the same exquisite style in soft lavender. Their dark hair was styled in perfect ringlets with small ribbons that matched their dresses, and they held Natalie's hands with the practiced ease of children accustomed to formal events and public attention. They were absolutely stunning. More than stunning, they were impossible to ignore, impossible to dismiss, impossible to explain away as coincidence. Marcus felt his breath catch as he took in details that made his heart race with recognition and terror. The girl in pink had his exact chin dimple. The one in lavender had his stubborn cowlick that no amount of styling could completely tame. Both had his dark hair color and the particular way his eyebrows drew together when they were thinking seriously. When the pink-dressed child turned her head slightly to look around the ballroom with obvious curiosity, Marcus saw his own green eyes staring back at him from across the room. Who are those children? Vivian's voice was sharp with something Marcus couldn't immediately identify: surprise, calculation, or perhaps recognition. He couldn't answer, couldn't breathe, couldn't process what he was seeing because the mathematics were impossible to ignore, and the implications were devastating to everything he thought he knew about his life. The girls were 4 years old. He and Natalie had been divorced for 18 months. That meant, Marcus. Vivian's voice seemed to come from very far away. Marcus, who are they? The crowd parted as Natalie moved through the ballroom with the confidence of someone who belonged in such spaces, not the uncertain steps of someone trying to navigate unfamiliar territory. People approached her with genuine warmth, not the polite courtesy reserved for plus-ones or social climbers trying to network their way into better circles. Several of Ohio's most powerful figures, people Marcus had been trying to cultivate relationships with for years, greeted Natalie like an old friend. The mayor's wife embraced her warmly. The university president's husband immediately engaged the twins in conversation with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to charming children. Natalie Rivers. The Gala's host, philanthropy chair Margaret Ashford, approached with outstretched arms and the kind of genuine enthusiasm usually reserved for celebrities or major donors. Our guest of honor. You look absolutely radiant, darling. Guest of honor? Marcus felt the room spin slightly as these words penetrated his consciousness. Natalie wasn't here as some desperate ex-wife trying to crash his social scene or prove she could compete in his world. She was here as the guest of honor, being celebrated by Ohio's elite while he stood in the corner with his much younger girlfriend like some pathetic middle-aged cliché from a bad movie. And these must be Isabella and Sophia. Margaret was now kneeling to greet the little girls with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to children and comfortable with potentially wrinkled designer clothing. I've heard so much about your mommy's incredible work helping other children. Are you excited to see her receive her award tonight? Award? Marcus's legs felt unsteady as he processed this information. An award. She was receiving an award at an event he'd chosen specifically to humiliate her. She was being honored while he'd planned to flaunt his new relationship like some sort of pathetic victory lap. Daddy, came a small voice near his elbow. Marcus looked down to see another little girl, not one of the twins, tugging on the sleeve of a man behind him. The man turned, revealing himself to be Dr. James Chun, one of Marcus's former investors who'd pulled funding from Hartwell Industries after the messy divorce proceedings. "Yes, sweetheart. That lady looks like the pictures in Mommy's office at work. Is that the man Mommy used to be married to?" Dr. Chen followed his daughter's gaze to Marcus, and understanding dawned in his expression along with something that looked uncomfortably like pity. "Yes, Sophia, that's Mr. Hartwell. He looks smaller than in the pictures. If this story is already turning your understanding of success and failure upside down, you need to hear what happens next. Hit that like button because this night is about to expose the difference between winning and actually being victorious." The formal program began at 8 o'clock sharp with the precision of an event organized by people who understood that punctuality was a form of respect. Marcus found himself seated at table 12, respectable enough to avoid embarrassment, but not the power position near the podium he'd specifically requested through his assistant's careful coordination with the event planners. Somehow, his seating had been changed without notification, and he suspected the hands of someone who understood the subtle politics of social hierarchy and wanted to send a message about his current standing in the community. Vivian sat beside him, her earlier confidence replaced by calculating observation that made Marcus uncomfortable in ways he couldn't quite articulate. She watched every interaction around them, cataloged every relationship and power dynamic, her marketing mind clearly working to understand social and business dynamics that hadn't been included in Marcus's intelligence briefing about tonight's event. Her phone buzzed constantly with text messages that she answered with quick, furtive taps, always angling the screen away from Marcus's line of sight. When he asked who was texting so urgently, she claimed it was work emergencies that couldn't wait until Monday morning. "Ladies and gentlemen," Margaret Ashford's voice carried across the ballroom from the podium, amplified by a sound system that ensured every word reached even the most distant tables. "Tonight we celebrate not just philanthropy, but transformation. Our honored guest has shown us that sometimes the greatest victories rise from our deepest defeats." Marcus's chest tightened as he realized the speech was about Natalie, about how she'd overcome their divorce to achieve something worthy of recognition from Ohio's most influential citizens. 18 months ago, Natalie Rivers could have chosen bitterness, could have chosen retreat into private pain and public invisibility. Instead, she chose to build something beautiful and meaningful from the ashes of personal devastation. Tonight, we honor her extraordinary work with the Rivers Foundation for Educational Innovation. The lights dimmed except for a spotlight that found Natalie's table near the front of the ballroom. She rose gracefully, acknowledging the applause with the poise of someone accustomed to public recognition, and Marcus could see the little girls, Isabella and Sophia, looking up at their mother with undisguised pride and adoration that made his throat tight with unexpected emotion. "In just 18 months, Margaret continued, her voice carrying genuine admiration that couldn't be faked for social politeness, the Rivers Foundation has revolutionized tech education for underprivileged children across Ohio. Using innovative software platforms and hands-on learning experiences that bridge digital divides, Ms. Rivers has created educational opportunities for over 50,000 children who previously had no access to quality STEM education." Marcus felt the blood drain from his face as the magnitude of this achievement hit him. 50,000 children. In 18 months. While he'd been focused on quarterly profits and market share expansion, his ex-wife had built something that actually changed lives on a massive scale. His own company's corporate social responsibility initiatives were tax write-offs and public relations gestures, donations to established charities and sponsorships of youth sports teams that got his company's name on uniforms and in local newspapers. Natalie had created an entirely new nonprofit organization from scratch and scaled it to impact tens of thousands of lives. But perhaps most remarkably, Margaret's voice grew warmer with genuine respect. Ms. Rivers accomplished this transformation while raising her twin daughters as a single mother, proving that true strength isn't about what you build for yourself, it's about what you build for others, especially when you're starting from ground zero. The applause was thunderous, sustained, and clearly heartfelt rather than merely polite. Marcus watched as Natalie made her way to the podium, her daughters remaining at their table with what appeared to be a trusted caregiver who was obviously accustomed to such events. Natalie moved with the confidence of someone who belonged in this spotlight, not someone uncomfortable with attention or unprepared for public speaking. At the podium, she paused for a moment, her eyes scanning the crowd until they found Marcus's table. For just an instant, their gazes locked across the room, and he saw something in her expression that made his stomach drop with the force of recognition. Not anger, not hurt, not the bitterness he'd expected and perhaps hoped for. Pity. She pitied him. Thank you. Natalie's voice carried clearly through the sound system, professional and composed in a way that reminded Marcus of why he'd fallen in love with her intelligence and grace in the first place. 18 months ago, I found myself at a crossroads that I'm sure many of you can relate to. I could choose to be defined by what I'd lost, or I could choose to be defined by what I could build. Marcus realized with growing horror that she was talking about their divorce. In front of Ohio's elite. In front of his business rivals and social contacts. In front of people whose opinions could make or break careers in this state. I chose to build. Not for myself, but for Isabella and Sophia, my daughters, who deserve to see their mother as someone who lifted others up rather than someone who tore others down. The words were delivered with perfect grace and measured cadence, but Marcus heard the steel beneath them. This wasn't just a speech, it was a masterclass in dignity, a public lesson in how real strength operated when faced with devastating personal setbacks. The Rivers Foundation exists because every child deserves the same opportunities that privilege provides. Every child deserves to see technology not as something exclusive and intimidating, but as something that can transform their future and break cycles of poverty that have persisted for generations. As she spoke, Marcus began to realize the scope of what she'd accomplished. The foundation wasn't just a charity, it was a comprehensive educational ecosystem. She described mobile learning labs that brought cutting-edge technology to rural schools, coding boot camps for inner-city teenagers, partnerships with major universities to provide scholarship pipelines, and teacher training programs that had certified over 2,000 educators in advanced technology instruction. We've learned that education isn't just about providing information, Natalie continued, her voice growing stronger with passion for her subject. It's about providing hope. When a child from Appalachian, Ohio learns to code and realizes they can build applications that solve real-world problems, they don't just gain a skill, they gain agency over their own destiny. Marcus felt a sick recognition growing in his stomach. The programs she was describing sounded suspiciously similar to technologies and methodologies his own company had developed. Similar, but better. More innovative. More socially conscious. More effectively implemented. Our success metrics aren't measured in profit margins or stock prices, Natalie said, and Marcus wondered if she was looking directly at him when she said it. We measure success in children who are now attending college on full scholarships, in teenagers who've started their own tech companies, in families whose economic circumstances have been permanently transformed through education. She spoke for 15 minutes, outlining an organization that had achieved in 18 months what most nonprofits took decades to accomplish. She talked about partnerships with Google and Microsoft to provide free software licenses, collaborations with Stanford and MIT to develop curriculum, and a waiting list of schools across 3 states begging to join the program. As she described impact studies and outcome metrics, Marcus began to understand something that made his blood run cold. Natalie hadn't just survived their divorce. She'd used it as fuel to build something that dwarfed his achievements in terms of actual human impact. While he'd been acquiring smaller companies and expanding market share in incremental percentages, she'd been changing the trajectory of thousands of lives. In closing, Natalie said, her voice growing softer but somehow more powerful, I want to thank everyone who believed that a devastated ex-wife could become something more than her circumstances, who saw potential where others saw damage, who understood that sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies, it's becoming the person you were always meant to be. The standing ovation lasted nearly 6 minutes. As Marcus watched the crowd's genuine enthusiasm for his ex-wife's work, he felt something foreign and deeply uncomfortable settling in his chest. Shame. Pure, unadulterated shame at his own pettiness, his own small-minded focus on personal revenge while she'd been focused on transforming the world. She's good, Vivian murmured beside him, but there was something strange in her voice. Something that didn't sound like admiration or even professional respect. Marcus turned to study his girlfriend's profile in the dim lighting. He could see her fingers dancing across her phone screen again, typing rapidly with the urgency of someone managing a crisis or coordinating a complex operation. Who was she texting during the most important moment of the evening? What could possibly be more important than the social and professional implications of what they were witnessing? "Excuse me," Vivian said suddenly, standing with the kind of abrupt movement that suggested genuine urgency rather than polite social necessity. "I need to powder my nose. This champagne goes right through me." She moved toward the exit with purpose that seemed inconsistent with her stated destination, and something about her urgency made Marcus suspicious. There was a calculated quality to her timing, leaving just as Natalie finished her speech, just as conversations would resume and attention would be divided. Marcus waited 30 seconds, then followed, telling himself he was being paranoid while simultaneously trusting the instincts that had built his business empire. The conversation he overheard in the hallway outside the ballroom would haunt him for the rest of his life. Recording everything perfectly, Vivian was saying into her phone, her voice completely different from the breathy, adoring whisper she used with him. This voice was sharp, professional, calculating, the voice of someone conducting serious business. He's completely humiliated, sitting there like a fool while his ex-wife gets honored for charity work. The optics are perfect. Marcus pressed himself against the marble wall behind a decorative pillar, his heart hammering against his ribs as the implications of what he was hearing began to crystallize. "No, he has no idea," Vivian continued, her tone carrying the satisfaction of someone whose long-term plan was finally reaching fruition. "Marcus is so arrogant and self-absorbed, he can't see past his own ego. Yes, I've documented all the insider information you requested. Financial records, strategic plans, client lists, merger discussions, everything Thompson Tech needs for the acquisition." The world tilted sideways as Marcus realized the scope of his betrayal. Thompson Tech, his biggest rival, the company that had been mysteriously staying one step ahead of his moves for the past year, underbidding him on major contracts, poaching his clients with inside knowledge of his pricing strategies, anticipating his expansion plans with uncanny accuracy. "The recordings of tonight will be perfect for the board presentation," Vivian was saying, her voice carrying across the marble hallway with crystal clarity, showing him publicly humiliated, making terrible personal decisions, bringing his mistress to shame his ex-wife, while she's being honored for transformative charity work. The shareholders will lose confidence immediately. The optics alone will tank the stock price before we even release the financial irregularities. Marcus's legs nearly gave out as the full scope of the conspiracy became clear. The woman he'd been sleeping with for 8 months, the woman he'd trusted with company secrets and strategic plans, the woman he'd given access to his personal and professional life, was a corporate spy. Everything, their relationship, tonight's humiliation, his recent business struggles, had been orchestrated with meticulous precision. "Don't worry," Vivian's voice carried the casual confidence of someone whose victory was assured. "By Monday morning, Marcus Hartwell will be finished, and Thompson Tech will have everything they need to complete the hostile takeover. The due diligence package is already compiled. The board presentation is scheduled for Tuesday. His company will be absorbed by Wednesday, and he'll be lucky to walk away with enough severance to buy a decent condo." She paused, apparently listening to instructions from whoever was on the other end of the call. "The personal destruction is just as important as the financial," she continued, making him look like a pathetic middle-aged cliché-chasing young women while his accomplished ex-wife builds a charity empire? That kills his credibility in the business community permanently. Even if he tries to start over, no investor will trust his judgment. No board will give him another CEO position. "We're not just taking his company, we're ending his career." Marcus felt nauseous as he realized how thoroughly he'd been played. Every intimate moment, every business discussion, every strategic decision he'd shared with her had been carefully documented and transmitted to his enemies. He'd been so flattered by her attention, so convinced of his own irresistible success, that he'd never questioned why a brilliant, beautiful woman would be so devoted to a man 18 years her senior. "The timing couldn't be more perfect," Vivian was saying. His ex-wife's foundation just announced a major expansion. She's getting offered board positions at Fortune 500 companies. Meanwhile, he's here looking desperate and vindictive. The contrast writes itself. She ended the call and checked her appearance in a hallway mirror, transforming back into the adoring girlfriend with practiced ease. Her reflection showed no trace of the cold calculation he'd just witnessed. Marcus barely managed to slip back into the ballroom before she returned, his mind reeling with the implications of everything he'd discovered. As he sat in his chair, watching Natalie accept congratulations from Ohio's most influential citizens while his business empire crumbled around him through betrayal he'd never seen coming, one thought echoed in his mind. He'd been so focused on destroying his ex-wife that he hadn't noticed the people working systematically to destroy him. But more importantly, sitting at their table near the front, two little girls with his eyes and his stubborn jawline were applauding their mother's success built on the foundation of his abandonment. For the first time in 18 months, Marcus Hartwell wasn't thinking about revenge or business rivals or market share. He was thinking about the children he'd never known he had, and the woman who'd become extraordinary while he'd been busy being petty and vindictive. The worst part? The night was far from over. Vivian returned to the table with her composed girlfriend mask firmly in place, sliding into her chair with feline grace. "Sorry, darling. Work emergency that couldn't wait." "What kind of emergency?" Marcus asked, his voice carefully neutral despite the rage burning in his chest. "Oh, just some client concerns about the quarterly projections. You know how nervous investors get when numbers don't align perfectly with expectations." Her smile was perfectly innocent, but Marcus now heard the double meaning in every word. As the gala moved into its social hour, with guests mingling between tables and continuing conversations over premium champagne and artisanal hors d'oeuvres, Marcus found himself watching Natalie from across the room with new eyes. She moved through the crowd with the confidence of someone who belonged in such spaces, engaging in meaningful conversations rather than empty networking chatter. He watched her kneel down to listen when children approached her, saw her laugh genuinely at something the university president's wife said, observed her gracefully deflecting what appeared to be romantic interest from several successful single men who clearly recognized her worth. And through it all, Isabella and Sophia remained close to their mother, perfectly behaved, but clearly comfortable in this adult world. They answered questions from curious adults with articulate responses that suggested careful coaching and natural intelligence. When the mayor's granddaughter approached them, they included her in their conversation with the kind of social grace usually developed through years of practice. "Those children are remarkably well-behaved," commented Mrs. Patterson, the wife of Ohio's lieutenant governor, as she paused at Marcus's table, "and so articulate for their age. Natalie has done an extraordinary job raising them." "Yes," Marcus managed, his voice strained. "They're remarkable. Such a pity their father isn't in the picture," Mrs. Patterson continued, apparently unaware of Marcus's identity in relation to the children. "Though I suppose given Natalie's success, she's probably better off without whatever complications that relationship might have brought." The comment hit Marcus like a physical blow. His own absence from his daughter's lives was being discussed as a positive thing, as something that had allowed them to thrive rather than something that had deprived them of opportunities or love. "Excuse me," he said abruptly, standing from the table. "I need some air." But as he moved toward the ballroom's terrace doors, a commotion near Natalie's table caught his attention. Isabella, the twin in the pink dress, had suddenly swayed in her chair. Even from across the room, Marcus could see that something was wrong. The child's face had gone pale, and she was leaning heavily against her sister while pressing a small hand to her stomach. Natalie noticed immediately, her mother's instincts overriding everything else. She knelt beside her daughter's chair, and Marcus saw a real panic flash across her face, primal, terrifying fear that made his chest tighten with unexpected protectiveness. "Isabella, sweetheart, what's wrong?" Natalie's voice carried across the S. "My tummy hurts really bad, Mommy," the little girl whispered, tears beginning to stream down her cheeks. "It hurts like when I had to go to the hospital before." Before? Marcus felt ice form in his stomach as he realized this wasn't the first medical emergency his daughter had experienced. "Is there a doctor in the house?" Natalie called out, her composed public persona cracking under maternal fear. Dr. Chen appeared immediately, kneeling beside the child with professional efficiency. "Let me take a look, sweetie," he said gently, his hands moving with practiced skill as he checked Isabella's pulse and examined her coloring. Marcus was moving before he consciously decided to, crossing the room in long strides that ignored social protocol and table arrangements. He might not be a doctor, but he was her father, even if she didn't know it yet. Even if he was the last person Natalie wanted help from. "We need to get her to Children's Hospital immediately," Dr. Chen said quietly to Natalie. "Her symptoms are consistent with appendicitis. If that's what this is, we can't wait." Natalie's face went white. "Oh God, not again. Mommy, I'm scared," Sophia said, reaching for her mother's hand while tears filled her eyes at seeing her twin sister in pain. "I know, baby. It's going to be okay." Natalie was already reaching for her phone, presumably to call for transportation, when Marcus appeared beside her. "My car is faster," he said simply. "And I know the route to Children's Hospital like the back of my hand." Natalie looked up at him, surprise and suspicion warring with desperate maternal need. "Marcus, this isn't about us," he said firmly. "This is about getting Isabella help as quickly as possible." For a moment, she hesitated, and Marcus could see her weighing her pride against her daughter's welfare. Maternal instinct won. "Okay," she said quietly. "Thank you." Marcus scooped Isabella into his arms, struck by how light she felt, how fragile and precious. As he carried his daughter toward the exit, he caught Vivian's eye across the room. She was watching the scene with an expression he couldn't quite read, calculation mixed with something that might have been genuine concern. "Go ahead," she called out. "I'll find another ride home." The ride to Children's Hospital was tense and terrifying. Isabella dozed fitfully in Natalie's arms while Sophia held her sister's hand and whispered reassurances. Marcus drove with the precision of someone whose daughter's life might depend on every second saved, using back roads and traffic patterns learned from years of navigating Columbus at high speed. "Turn left here," Natalie said quietly. "The emergency entrance is faster than the main lobby." "How do you know that?" Marcus asked, though he was already making the turn. "Experience," she replied, her voice tight with worry and memory. "Isabella has a condition called recurrent abdominal episodes. She's been hospitalized 3 times since she turned 3. 3 times. His daughter had been hospitalized 3 times, and he'd known nothing about it. While he'd been closing deals and expanding market share, his child had been fighting medical battles that terrified her mother and threatened her young life. They reached the hospital in record time, and Marcus carried Isabella through the emergency room doors while Natalie handled the check-in procedures with the efficiency of someone who'd done this before. The triage nurse recognized them immediately. "Back again, Isabella," she said gently. "Let's get you taken care of, sweetheart." Within minutes, Isabella was on a gurney being wheeled toward examination rooms while Natalie provided medical history to the attending physician. Marcus found himself relegated to the waiting room with Sophia, who was trying very hard to be brave for a 4-year-old who'd just watched her twin sister disappear behind hospital doors. "Is Isabella going to be okay?" Sophia asked, climbing into the chair beside Marcus with the trusting innocence of a child who assumed all adults could provide comfort and answers. Marcus looked down at his daughter, and felt his heart break a little. "The doctors here are very good at taking care of little girls," he said carefully. "They're going to make sure Isabella feels better." "Mommy says Isabella has a sensitive tummy because she's special," Sophia continued, apparently finding comfort in conversation. "But I think all tummies should work the same way." "That's a very smart observation," Marcus replied, struck by her logical thinking processes. They sat in uncomfortable plastic chairs under fluorescent lights that made everyone look pale and tired. The pediatric waiting room was decorated with cheerful murals and stocked with toys and books, but nothing could disguise the underlying anxiety that permeated hospital spaces. 20 minutes later, Natalie emerged from the treatment area looking exhausted but relieved. "It's not appendicitis," she announced. "Just a severe gastric episode related to her condition. They're giving her medication and keeping her for observation overnight." "Can we see her?" Sophia asked immediately. "In a few minutes, baby. She's sleeping right now." Natalie sank into a chair across from Marcus, and for the first time since their divorce, They were alone together without anger or lawyers or public scrutiny between them. The hospital's harsh lighting revealed the stress lines around her eyes, the exhaustion that came from single parenting a medically complex child while building a non-profit empire. She has gastroparesis, Natalie said quietly, apparently deciding that the father of her children deserved some explanation. It's a condition where the stomach muscles don't work properly. Food doesn't digest normally, which causes episodes like tonight. Is it serious? It can be. She's been hospitalized for dehydration and malnutrition when the episodes are severe. She takes medication daily and has to follow a very specific diet. Natalie's voice was matter of fact, but Marcus heard the underlying fear of a mother who'd learned to manage a chronic condition that could turn dangerous without warning. How long has she had this? Since she was 18 months old, right around the time our divorce was finalized. The timing hit Marcus like a physical blow. While he'd been celebrating his freedom from marriage and focusing on expanding his business internationally, his daughter had been developing a chronic medical condition that required constant vigilance and care. The medical bills, he began, are handled, Natalie said firmly. I have excellent insurance through the foundation, and Isabella's condition is well managed now that we understand it. Marcus stared at her, recognizing the pride and independence that had attracted him to her in college, but also seeing something new, a strength forged through necessity, through being solely responsible for everything in her children's lives. Natalie, he said quietly, those beautiful little girls calling you mommy, they're mine, aren't they? She looked up from where she'd been staring at her hands, and for the first time since their reunion, her carefully constructed composure cracked slightly. You lost the right to ask that question the day you served me divorce papers while accusing me of trying to trap you with a pregnancy I supposedly fabricated. But they're 4 years old. The timeline you were too busy destroying our marriage to notice, she whispered fiercely, glancing toward the treatment area where Isabella was sleeping. I was 8 weeks pregnant when you decided your business rivalry with Thompson Tech was more important than your wife trying to tell you she was carrying twins. Marcus sank deeper into his plastic chair, his $15,000 tuxedo suddenly feeling like a costume from a play he no longer understood. All this time they've been out there, and I never knew I had daughters. You never wanted to know, Natalie shot back, years of suppressed anger finally surfacing. You were so convinced I was some gold digger trying to sabotage your precious company that you couldn't see I was carrying your children and trying to save our marriage. I thought you were trying to trap me. Trap you. Natalie's voice rose slightly before she caught herself and glanced toward other waiting families. Marcus, I was trying to share the most incredible news of our lives with you. I'd planned this romantic dinner, bought a bottle of champagne, had ultrasound photos in a gift box. But you came home ranting about Thompson Tech's latest bid and how you suspected corporate espionage. And when I tried to tell you about the pregnancy, you accused me of trying to distract you from important business. The memory came flooding back with painful clarity. He'd been consumed with paranoia about business rivals, convinced that someone was feeding inside information to his competitors. When Natalie had tried to have a serious conversation about their future, he dismissed it as poor timing and emotional manipulation. You said the timing was suspicious, Natalie continued, her voice thick with old pain. That it was convenient how I wanted to discuss family expansion right when you were dealing with corporate threats. You actually suggested I might be working with your competitors to destabilize your focus. Marcus felt sick as he remembered his accusations, his paranoid ranting about loyalty and trust. He'd been so convinced that everyone was plotting against his business success that he'd destroyed the most important relationship in his life. I tried to show you the ultrasound photos, Natalie whispered. You were on the phone with lawyers, and you told me whatever I was selling could wait until you dealt with real problems. Natalie, 3 days later, you had divorce papers delivered to my office, she continued relentlessly. At my job, in front of my colleagues, with a note saying you'd realized I wasn't the partner you needed for your level of success. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Marcus confronted the full scope of what he'd destroyed. He'd been so focused on protecting his business empire that he'd obliterated his actual family before he even knew it existed. I called you, Natalie said quietly, after the papers were served. I tried one last time to tell you about the pregnancy. Your assistant said you were in Singapore closing the Thompson deal and couldn't be disturbed for personal matters. The Singapore deal, Marcus repeated hollowly. The contract that had launched his international expansion, the triumph he'd celebrated while his pregnant ex-wife had been trying to reach him from halfway around the world. By the time you came back 6 weeks later, I'd already moved out of our house. I'd started the divorce proceedings you wanted, and I'd decided that my children deserved better than a father who saw them as obstacles to his success. Children, Marcus said numbly. Twins, Isabella and Sophia. Born at 36 weeks because the stress of the divorce triggered early labor. They spent 3 weeks in the NICU while you were in Germany expanding your European operations. Each revelation was another knife to his chest. While he'd been conquering international markets and building his empire, his daughters had been fighting for their lives in a hospital room he'd never seen. Why didn't you tell me after they were born? Why didn't you demand child support or custody arrangements? Natalie was quiet for a long moment, staring at the pediatric ward doors where their daughter was sleeping. Because you'd made it clear that you saw family as a threat to your ambitions. Because I didn't want my children growing up feeling like burdens or complications in their father's grand plans. Because I wanted them to know they were wanted and treasured, not tolerated. But the money, raising twins alone, was my choice, Natalie said firmly. I used my half of our divorce settlement to start the foundation. I worked 18-hour days while they napped, built partnerships while they played, created programs that would change thousands of lives while making sure my own children felt secure and loved. Marcus stared at her, beginning to understand the magnitude of what she'd accomplished. She hadn't just survived his abandonment. She'd transformed it into fuel for building something extraordinary. While he'd been focused on acquiring companies and expanding profits, she'd been changing the world and raising his children simultaneously. They don't know, he said quietly, about me. They know their father wasn't ready to be a dad when they were born, Natalie replied carefully. They know that sometimes adults make different choices about what's important to them, but they also know they're loved completely by the parent who stayed. The conversation they're about to have will determine if this family has any chance of healing. Are you feeling the emotional weight of this moment? Drop a comment below about second chances. Do you believe people can truly change? Before Marcus could respond, a nurse appeared with news that Isabella was awake and asking for her mother and sister. They were allowed brief visits, and Marcus found himself standing in a hospital room, looking down at his daughter for the first time as her father. Isabella looked so small in the hospital bed, connected to and for that made her seem fragile and vulnerable. But her eyes, his eyes, were alert and curious as she studied this stranger who'd apparently helped bring her to the hospital. Are you the man from the fancy party? She asked in a small but clear voice. Yes, Marcus replied, his throat tight with emotion. My name is Marcus. How are you feeling, sweetheart? Better, she said simply. My tummy doesn't hurt as much now. Thank you for helping Mommy bring me to the hospital. The simple gratitude from his daughter nearly destroyed his composure. This child, his child, was thanking him for the basic act of helping her get medical care, something that should have been his automatic responsibility as her father. You don't need to thank me, he said gently. I'm just glad you're feeling better. Sophia climbed onto the hospital bed beside her sister with the practiced ease of someone who'd done this before. Isabella, this is the man who built the really tall buildings. Remember from the book at school? You build buildings? Isabella asked, her interest perking up despite her medical situation. I do, Marcus confirmed. I design them and figure out how to make them strong and safe. Like Legos. Exactly like Legos, but much bigger. Cool, Isabella said with the simple acceptance of childhood. Maybe someday you can show us how to build really tall Lego buildings. I'd like that very much, Marcus replied, meaning it with every fiber of his being. As they prepared to leave the hospital, Isabella would be discharged in the morning. Marcus realized his phone had been buzzing constantly with urgent messages. When he finally checked it, his blood ran cold. 17 missed calls from his CFO, 23 urgent text messages, an email marked crisis, immediate response required. The markets had opened in Asia, and somehow, details of Hartwell Industries' financial irregularities had been leaked to major financial news outlets. Stock prices were in free fall. Emergency board meetings were being called. Investors were demanding explanations for accounting discrepancies that Marcus had never seen before. "What is it?" Natalie asked, noting his expression. "My company," Marcus said hollowly. "Someone's destroying it. Tonight, while I was focused on trying to humiliate your ex-wife," Natalie finished quietly. "Yes," Marcus admitted. "While I was planning petty revenge, someone was systematically destroying everything I'd built." His phone rang, displaying his CFO's number. Marcus answered, stepping into the hallway for privacy. "Marcus, where the hell have you been?" came the panicked voice. "We've got a crisis that could sink the entire company. Someone leaked detailed financial information to Reuters and the Wall Street Journal. They're reporting accounting irregularities, insider trading allegations, and corporate governance violations I've never heard of." "That's impossible," Marcus said, though his stomach was already dropping as he remembered Vivian's phone conversation. "Our books are clean. Not according to these documents. Someone has internal emails, board meeting minutes, financial projections that show deliberate misrepresentation to shareholders. Marcus, this looks like a coordinated attack designed to destroy our credibility and tank the stock price." Thompson Tech, the hostile takeover Vivian had mentioned. While Marcus had been playing romantic games with a woman he thought was devoted to him, she'd been systematically documenting everything needed to destroy his company and hand it to his biggest rival. "There's more," his CFO continued. "Thompson Tech announced an acquisition offer 20 minutes ago. They're proposing to buy Hartwell Industries at 30% below last week's market value, claiming they're doing us a favor by acquiring a financially distressed company." Marcus closed his eyes, leaning against the hospital wall as the full scope of his destruction became clear. He'd been so focused on winning a personal battle against his ex-wife that he'd lost the corporate war entirely. "The board is meeting tomorrow morning," his CFO continued. "If we can't provide explanations for these allegations, they're likely to recommend accepting Thompson's offer. We'd lose everything, Marcus. Everything we built." Marcus looked through the hospital room window at Natalie helping their daughters gather their things, and for the first time in his adult life, he found himself faced with a choice that had nothing to do with profit margins or market share. He could race back to Columbus, spend the night and the next several days fighting to save his company, trying to rebuild his reputation and salvage his business empire. He could probably find ways to discredit Vivian's evidence, hire expensive lawyers, and perhaps even survive the attempted takeover. Or he could stay here, in this hospital, with the family he'd never known he had, and finally try to be the father his daughters deserved. "Schedule the board meeting for Tuesday," Marcus said quietly into the phone. "I'll be there." "Tuesday? Marcus, this is happening now. Every hour we delay gives Thompson more ammunition." "Tuesday," Marcus repeated firmly. "I have more important things to deal with right now." He ended the call and returned to the hospital room, where Natalie was helping Isabella into a wheelchair for the journey to the car. "Everything okay?" she asked, though her tone suggested she suspected it wasn't. "No," Marcus said honestly. "My business is falling apart. Someone I trusted has been feeding information to my competitors, and they're using tonight's performance to justify a hostile takeover." Natalie studied his face carefully. "And you're choosing to stay here instead of racing back to fix it?" "I'm choosing to make sure my daughter gets home safely," Marcus replied. "The business can wait until Tuesday." Something shifted in Natalie's expression, surprise, perhaps, or the beginning of respect for a priority system she'd never seen him demonstrate before. "Marcus," she said carefully, "you don't have to." "Yes, I do," he interrupted gently. "I've missed 4 years of my daughter's lives because I thought business was more important than family. I'm not missing another moment." As they helped Isabella into Marcus's car for the drive back to Natalie's house, he realized this might be the most expensive decision he'd ever made. By Tuesday, he might not have a company left to save. His business empire might be reduced to rubble, his reputation destroyed, his financial future uncertain. But for the first time in years, Marcus Hartwell was exactly where he belonged. The drive to Natalie's house in Aurora was quiet except for the twins' sleepy chatter in the back seat. Isabella was feeling much better thanks to the hospital's medication, and Sophia was relieved to have her sister back to normal. They discussed their favorite parts of the fancy party, marveled at the beautiful dresses and chandeliers, and debated whether the tiny sandwiches or the chocolate fountain had been more impressive. Marcus found himself smiling at their innocent observations, struck by how these children could find joy and wonder even in the midst of medical scares and adult drama they didn't fully understand. Natalie's house was modest but beautiful, a craftsman-style home with warm lighting and a front garden that spoke of careful attention and love. As they pulled into the driveway, Marcus realized this was the first time he'd seen where his children lived, the spaces that had shaped their daily lives for 4 years. "Thank you," Natalie said as he helped carry Isabella inside. "For tonight. For the hospital. For staying when your business needed you." "Thank you," Marcus replied, "for letting me help. For not shutting me out when you had every right to." They got the twins settled for the night, a process that involved story time, careful medication dosing for Isabella, and the kind of patient bedtime routine that spoke of years of practice. Marcus watched from the doorway as Natalie transformed from accomplished nonprofit leader back into devoted mother, and he began to understand the dual life she'd been managing with remarkable skill. When the children were finally asleep, Natalie and Marcus found themselves alone in her living room, surrounded by the evidence of family life he'd never experienced. Children's artwork on the refrigerator, photo albums chronicling 4 years of milestones, toys organized in baskets that suggested careful attention to creating both fun and order. "They're remarkable," Marcus said softly, studying family photos that showed his daughters growing from infants to toddlers to the articulate 4-year-olds he'd met tonight. "They are," Natalie agreed. "And they deserve better than the chaos that's probably about to surround your life." Marcus understood what she was saying. His business troubles would become public knowledge, bringing media attention and financial uncertainty that could disrupt the stable life she'd built for their daughters. "I'll do whatever you think is best," he said. "If you want me to stay away until things settle, is that what you want?" Natalie interrupted. Marcus looked at her sitting cross-legged on her couch, still wearing the designer gown from the gala, but with her hair falling loosely around her shoulders and her makeup slightly smeared from the hospital's harsh lighting. She looked real and approachable in a way that reminded him of why he'd fallen in love with her 15 years ago. "I want to be their father," he said simply. "I want to learn their favorite foods and their bedtime stories and what makes them laugh. I want to be here when Isabella has medical episodes and when Sophia has questions about building things. I want to attend school events and birthday parties and all the ordinary moments I've missed. And when your business empire is rebuilt, when the excitement of family life wears off and quarterly reports start demanding your attention again." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, considering the question that cut to the heart of everything he'd learned about himself tonight. 18 months ago, you asked me to choose between business success and family happiness," he said slowly. "I chose business, and I lost everything that actually mattered. Tonight, my company is being destroyed while I sit in my ex-wife's living room, and I've never felt more clear about my priorities." Natalie studied his face with the careful attention of someone who'd learned not to trust words without evidence of changed behavior. "This isn't about grand gestures or dramatic declarations," Marcus continued. "This is about showing up every day, being present, earning the right to be called Dad through consistency and care. I know I don't deserve another chance, but I'm asking for one anyway. It's not my forgiveness you need," Natalie said softly. "It's theirs, and they don't even know they need to forgive you yet. Then let me earn their trust before they learn they need to question it." 6 months later, Marcus Hartwell was rebuilding his life from the ground up, though it looked nothing like the empire he'd lost. Thompson Tech's hostile takeover had succeeded, though the victory had proven hollow when Vivian's corporate espionage was exposed by a whistleblower within Thompson's organization. The scandal had destroyed both companies' reputations, leading to SEC investigations and criminal charges that were still working their way through the courts. Marcus had walked away from the wreckage with enough personal assets to start over, but not enough to maintain his previous lifestyle. He'd sold the mansion in Upper Arlington and moved into a modest townhouse 15 minutes from Natalie's home in Aurora. The Bentley had been replaced with a practical SUV suitable for car seats and family road trips. The designer wardrobe had given way to jeans and polo shirts appropriate for playground visits and children's birthday parties. He'd started a small consulting firm specializing in cybersecurity for nonprofits, work that was meaningful rather than merely profitable, helping organizations like Natalie's foundation protect themselves against the kind of corporate espionage he'd experienced firsthand. Most importantly, he was learning to be a father. Isabella and Sophia had accepted his presence in their lives with the adaptability of young children, though it had taken months of consistent behavior to convince them he was staying. He attended their preschool events, learned to manage Isabella's medical condition, and discovered that Sophia had inherited his mechanical aptitude along with his stubborn determination to understand how everything worked. "Daddy Marcus," Isabella called from the kitchen table where she was working on an art project. "Can you help me make this building taller without it falling down?" The title, Daddy Marcus, their own invention to distinguish him from the imaginary father they'd created before meeting him, still made his heart skip every time he heard it. "Let's see what you're working with," Marcus said, examining her construction paper and glue stick creation. "What kind of foundation did you use?" They spent 20 minutes engineering a stable base for her paper skyscraper, and Marcus marveled at how much more satisfaction he derived from helping his daughter solve a craft project problem than he'd ever gotten from closing million-dollar deals. Natalie appeared in the kitchen doorway, home from a board meeting at one of the universities that had offered her a position developing their STEM education programs. She'd been offered 3 executive positions at major corporations, but had chosen to expand her foundation's work instead, a decision Marcus now understood completely. "How was school today, girls?" she asked, kissing both twins on the top of their heads in the automatic gesture of mothers everywhere. "Mrs. Peterson said Isabella's building was the most creative in the class," Sophia reported. "And I learned how to write the number 57. And Daddy Marcus helped me make it not fall down," Isabella added with obvious pride in both her creation and her father's assistance. "That's wonderful," Natalie said, and Marcus caught her smiling at him over their daughters' heads. Their own relationship had been rebuilt slowly, carefully, with the patience of people who'd learned that trust had to be earned through actions rather than demanded through history. They weren't married, weren't even officially dating, but they were partners in raising their children and friends in the way that people who'd genuinely forgiven each other could be friends. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text message, and he glanced at it quickly before returning his attention to Isabella's architectural project. "Work?" Natalie asked. "Thompson Tech's board meeting," Marcus replied. "The SEC investigation concluded. Criminal charges are being filed against 6 executives, including Thompson himself. How do you feel about that?" Marcus considered the question while helping Isabella add paper windows to her skyscraper. 6 months ago, he would have felt vindicated, triumphant, eager for his enemy's destruction. Now, he mostly felt sad for the families that would be affected by their choices. "I feel grateful," he said finally. "If Thompson hadn't destroyed my company, I might never have learned what actually matters." And Vivian cooperated with investigators in exchange for immunity. She's apparently working as a paralegal in Portland now. Marcus shrugged. "I hope she's happy." Natalie raised an eyebrow at his lack of bitterness. "Holding on to anger about past betrayals is a luxury I can't afford," Marcus explained. "I'd rather spend that energy on building something better." That evening, after dinner and baths and bedtime stories, Marcus and Natalie found themselves alone on her back deck, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. "I have something to tell you," Natalie said, her voice carrying a nervous excitement that made Marcus's pulse quicken. "Good news or bad news?" "Good news, I think. The foundation has been invited to expand internationally. UNESCO wants us to develop programs for schools in developing countries. It would mean travel, probably relocating to Geneva for a year, managing operations across 3 continents. Marcus felt his chest tighten as he realized what she was telling him. This was the opportunity of a lifetime for her professionally, the chance to impact millions of children's lives instead of thousands. It was also potentially the end of the family relationship they'd been carefully building. "That's incredible, Natalie. You've dreamed of something like this." "I have," she admitted. "But I've also been dreaming of something else." "What's that?" She turned to face him fully, and in the sunset light, Marcus saw something in her expression that made his heart race with possibility. "I've been dreaming of doing it with a partner. Someone who understands both the mission and the sacrifices required. Someone who could help expand the cybersecurity and technology infrastructure side, while I focus on curriculum development and implementation." Marcus stared at her, hardly daring to believe what she seemed to be suggesting. "Are you offering me a job?" he asked carefully. "I'm offering you a partnership," Natalie replied. "Professional and personal. If you're interested in building something meaningful together." "What about the girls? What about their stability and their medical care?" "And Marcus," Natalie interrupted gently. "The girls' stability comes from having parents who love them and each other. Everything else is logistics." Marcus looked through the deck doors at the house where his daughters slept peacefully, then back at the woman who transformed from his greatest regret into his most treasured possibility. "Are you sure?" he asked. "Are you sure you trust me with something this important to you?" "I'm sure I trust the man you've become," Natalie replied. "The man who chose a hospital waiting room over a board meeting. The man who learned to braid hair and read bedtime stories and make paper buildings stable. The man who puts his daughter's medical appointments in his calendar before business meetings." She reached for his hand, and Marcus felt the same electric connection that had drawn them together 15 years ago, tempered now by the wisdom of people who'd learned what love actually required. "Besides," she continued with a smile that held all the warmth and possibility of their shared future, "Isabella and Sophia are going to need someone to teach them how to build really tall buildings in all those countries we'll be visiting." Marcus kissed her then, soft and gentle and full of gratitude for second chances and the possibility of redemption. When they broke apart, both were smiling. "Partners," he said. "Partners," Natalie agreed. 1 year later, the Morrison Rivers family stood together in the Geneva offices of the Rivers Foundation for Global Educational Innovation, watching as their latest program launched in schools across 12 countries simultaneously. Isabella and Sophia, now fluent in French and fascinated by international travel, helped their parents cut the ribbon for the opening ceremony. "Look, Daddy Marcus," Sophia said, pointing to the world map that showed program locations in bright red dots across 6 continents. "We're helping kids everywhere learn how to build things." "We certainly are, sweetheart," Marcus replied, lifting her up so she could see the map better. "What do you think? Should we add more red dots?" "All of them," Isabella declared with the ambitious certainty of a 5-year-old who'd learned that her parents specialized in making impossible things happen. "Every kid should know how to build things and make computers work and help other people." Marcus exchanged a look with Natalie over their daughters' heads, a look that held shared pride, mutual respect, and the quiet satisfaction of people who'd learned that the greatest success was measured not in dollars earned, but in lives changed. If this story reminded you that it's never too late to choose love over revenge, hit that subscribe button and share this with someone who needs to remember that the best revenge is becoming a better person. What's the most important lesson Marcus learned from his journey? Drop it in the comments below, and remember, real strength isn't about destroying others. It's about building something beautiful from the ashes of your mistakes. The truest measure of success isn't what you can afford to buy. It's what you're willing to give up for the people you love. Marcus Hartwell discovered that when you choose family over empire, you don't lose everything. You finally find it. This has been another story from Lux Love Chronicles with Mr. Wentworth, where love always finds a way and second chances can transform everything. Until next time, remember that it's never too late to become the person your children need you to be.